It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday morning in Vermont. I was pouring coffee when the pension office called. The woman on the line sounded cheerful, the kind of cheer that's paid by the hour. She said, "Mrs. Hart, we're just confirming yesterday's transfer, voice verified and approved by you." I froze. I hadn't approved anything. Then she said the words that cracked my life open. "Would you like to hear the recording for your peace of mind?" And they played it. My own voice filled the room, my tone, my laugh, even the way I say before I say yes. It knew my husband's name. It knew our first date cafe. It knew the answer to "What's your favorite tree?" It was me, but not me. That's the moment I realized someone had stolen more than money. They'd stolen my voice. Music rises. And within 24 hours, I'd learn who built that voice and why they were standing in my kitchen smiling. I called my niece, Lily, because she is the one who keeps telling me that I don't need to figure everything out alone. She had started stopping by after Frank died last winter, bringing me ready-made soups and frozen quiches and articles printed out about grief. She had a smile that made my porch light feel unnecessary, and a fiancé, Chase, who smiled like a salesman. They were getting married in May and needed a place to stay for a little while they saved up for a down payment. The little while turned into a summer and then into fall, and I told myself we were helping family. When Lily answered, she said, "Aunt Nora, you okay? You sound upset." "There was a call," I said. "They played a recording. It sounded like me. It sounded exactly like me." "What do you mean?" she asked, gentler. "You mean, like, they recorded you at some point and are replaying it?" "Not me," I said. "Not anything I said. Me saying things I never said." She was quiet for a breath. "That's awful. Are you sure you didn't? I mean, sometimes when we're stressed—" "I didn't authorize a transfer," I said, more sharply than I meant. "I know," she said quickly. "I believe you. I'll come right over. Where's Chase? He just ran to the hardware store. I'll tell him to meet us." By the time Lily arrived, my front porch had turned pale with the weak sun that never quite commits in October. She wore a fleece in a muted green that matched her eyes, the ones I'd watched squint at summer fireworks years ago when she was still a girl, and her mother, my sister Carrie, and I took her to the fair. She hugged me like I might break. In the kitchen, I explained again. She made tea because she always makes tea when she doesn't know what to say. When Chase came in, carrying a white bag from Wilson's Hardware, he put it down and listened with his head tilted just so, the way people do when they want to look interested in order to buy time. "Granite Pine Holdings," he repeated like a detective on TV. "Never heard of it." "I never heard of them either," I said. "What did the person sound like?" he asked. "Like me," I said, and like she'd known me for years. I told them about the coffee shop, the tree. "You two know the answers to those questions now because I told you just now," I added, feeling suddenly uneasy that the circle had widened again. Lily put her hand over mine. "We're going to fix this," she said. "We'll call someone. We'll put a freeze on your account. What do you call it? Fraud alert." Chase nodded. "I know a guy who's good with these things. He works in IT for a bank down in Boston. He can check if there's been other activity." My stomach tightened at the idea of a stranger knowing more about me. "I'll call Daniel," I said. "He's Frank's old friend. He's a lawyer. He handled the pension paperwork when Frank died. He'll know who to call." "Even better," Chase agreed. "Lawyers are scary to these companies. They move faster when they think someone's going to sue." I went to my office, which is really just the small bedroom where my desk sits between two bookcases. The light in there is flattering to paper, the kind of filtered light librarians like. I called Daniel Ortega in Burlington. He answered on the third ring with his courtroom voice, firm and careful. He said he'd make calls to the pension administrator's compliance department and to the bank that handles disbursements. He told me not to worry, and I believed him because Daniel is someone I've watched match facts to justice for 30 years. I hung up and took a breath that wasn't as shallow as the last three. I walked back into the kitchen to find Lily and Chase leaning over my kitchen island, their heads close together, their voices lowered. I caught one piece in the air between us like a leaf that refused to follow gravity. "It was clean," Chase said. "It matched the biometric." They jumped when I came in. "We should make a list," Lily said brightly, as if she'd been suggesting we write down groceries. Everything you remember about the call, names, times. I wrote. I wrote because writing anchors a person to the real. I wrote the time the call came. I wrote the name of the representative. I wrote a list of questions and answers that sounded like me but weren't. I wrote what my hands felt like holding the phone, the tremor, the heat. I wrote because I am a librarian, and librarians have always believed that if we catalog the world correctly, it will behave. I set the list in a folder in my desk. I locked the drawer. I felt silly locking it. This is Maplebridge. We leave our cars running in winter while we go into the post office, and no one steals them because everyone knows everybody. But I turned the key anyway. That evening, Daniel called back. He said the transfer had not settled yet, which was good. He said the account was frozen and the fraud team was escalating. He said they had flagged 2 earlier calls in the last month as suspicious now that we were looking. One asking about the procedure for changing a beneficiary, and one confirming details about direct deposit routing. He asked if I recalled those calls. I don't, I said, and found myself touching the back of my neck the way I do when I can't find a book I know was on the shelf 5 minutes ago. I felt embarrassed for a second, like maybe I should have remembered them, like maybe I had missed a step on a staircase everyone else knew about. It's fine, Daniel said gently. Most people don't note calls that seem routine. The point is, we have it flagged. He told me to expect to be contacted by someone from their cybersecurity vendor. He told me to keep track of any related calls. He told me to be ready for this to feel frustrating and slow. After I hung up, I stood in the hallway outside my office. I could hear voices through the thin wall to the mudroom where Lily and Chase had moved their shoes and coats and boxes, full of the life they were saving for. I wasn't proud of it, but I stepped closer, near the framed photograph of Frank and me smiling on a bench at Echo Lake decades ago. The voices came through the old plaster as if the house itself had decided I had a right to know what was inside my walls. You went too fast, Lily hissed in a whisper that had once told me secrets about crushes and report cards. What was I supposed to do? Chase whispered back. We had a window. The model was good enough to pass. We had the security answers. Not the questions, she said. Not all of them. She must have told them something without realizing. I told you the bank would be the easier one, he said. The pension office is old school. It's like calling the DMV. They probably still use faxes. Voice verification was the only way in. Don't use that word, she said sharply. Say voice ID or something. You sound like a movie villain. Okay, he said, and it sounded like he was smiling. Voice ID. I remembered what I tell kids when they whisper on the other side of the library stacks. If you don't want anyone to hear, go outside. I went into the kitchen, rattled mugs louder than I needed to, and when Lily came back in, her face was arranged in a gentle concern I recognized but didn't trust. I slept badly that night. Frank's side of the bed had a dip that my body knew and avoided, and in the dark my brain replayed the recording over and over. It was nauseating, like hearing a tape of a story hour I didn't remember doing, except the story hour was a theft. In the morning, frost crusted the edges of my yard. I like to walk a loop around the block in the mornings because movement convinces me I'm still part of the world. When I came back, there was a white SUV outside with a logo on the door I didn't recognize, Northline Home Services. A man with a tool belt was on my porch, tightening a screw that didn't need tightening. Morning, he said. We're here to service the boiler and check the smoke detectors. Your son-in-law scheduled it. I don't have a son-in-law, I said. He checked his clipboard. Fiancé, Chase. He said you wanted the safety check. I let the man in because I'm still the kind of person who lets plumbers and electricians into my house when they say they're here to prevent disasters. Lily acted surprised when the men walked past her in the hall and said Chase had thought it would make me feel safer after a will update conversation we never had. I stood there, dripping meltwater onto the mat from my shoes, and felt the edges of myself blur, the house filled with the sounds of maintenance, ladders thudding, carbon monoxide detector chirps, men's voices laughing about sports and lunches. Chase came in through the back door with a bag of screws and a roll of something that looked like tape but wasn't. He smiled at me like he'd brought me flowers. Hey, he said, I figured why not? Winter's coming. This way if you do decide to... with everything that's going on. With everything that's going on, I repeated. He nodded toward the boiler room. You can never be too careful. I said thank you, because I was still trying to understand my own voice in my own house. After the men left, Lily suggested we go through my papers, just in case anyone asks us to verify anything. We sat at the dining room table with its old pine top, and I watched Lily rearrange my life into piles, labeled with sticky notes in neat print. Pension, insurance, bank, will, deed. You are very organized, she said, and made a noise that might have been admiration. I don't know how you kept all this straight for years. I worked at a library, I said. That's what we do. Chase put on coffee and hovered, offering to shred anything I didn't need. I kept saying, not that, until he stopped asking. Later, when they went out to pick up a few things, I went to the room that used to be Frank's office, which now holds our shared life in neat boxes labeled by season. I took down a box marked audio. Frank had been an enthusiastic recorder of holidays, speeches, and occasions that seemed ordinary until captured. He had a dozen USB drives with labels like Eleanor Reading to Kids 2011 and Echo Lake 2009. He loved my voice because it calmed him when the world was louder than he could stand, and I hadn't been ready to listen to any of those old files since he died. I plugged one into the little laptop and clicked. My voice from 12 years ago filled the room reading Make Way for Ducklings, and I felt the past lay a hand on my shoulder. I clicked another. Eleanor at Church, Christmas Reading. Another. Heart Family Toast. Another. Phone voicemail backup. The last one was a folder. Inside, the file names weren't ours. They were strings of nonsense numbers and letters. I clicked one. Hi, this is Eleanor Hart, date of birth. I didn't say my date of birth out loud, not to myself, not in my house. I clicked another. Yes, I authorize. I closed the file with a hand that shook. I clicked a third. It was my laugh, the one I almost never hear but people tell me is distinctive. It sounded wrong in the way a smile looks wrong when it doesn't reach the eyes. It sounded like me with the life taken out of it. I sat there for a long time. I looked at the box. I looked at the files. I looked at the folder path, desktop/chasework/audio. I had never created a folder called Chasework, and I certainly had not put it on the desktop of Frank's old laptop. I went to the trash and saw recent deletions that made no sense for an old machine. My skin prickled the way it does when a storm is coming and the barometer falls. I called Daniel again, and this time I cried. I didn't mean to. It came out of me like the wrong voice had forced it out. He listened. He told me to unplug the laptop and not to touch another thing. He said he knew someone, a cyber forensics expert in Montpelier who could come by. He said her name was Rhea Shah and that she was careful and kind. He asked if I felt safe. I lied and said yes because I didn't know what unsafe would even look like in a house where the people who loved me had keys and smiled at me and made me tea. Rhea arrived that afternoon wearing a windbreaker and a patient expression. She carried a black case like a doctor's. She sat up on the dining table and asked if I wanted to watch. I said yes, because I've always believed that understanding robs fear of some of its teeth. She didn't explain everything she did. She didn't have to. She talked through some things the way a teacher does when she senses a student is hungry for the food of an answer. She said there were artifacts. She said she could see a folder that had been created a week ago and then renamed yesterday. She said she could see evidence of USB devices inserted and removed. She said she could see logins at odd hours. She said she could see that the files that sounded like my voice did not match the acoustic environment of any room in my house. Acoustic environment, I asked? Rooms have fingerprints, she said, smiling a little. Even quiet ones. Your voice bounces differently in here than it does in there. She nodded toward the kitchen. When people fake things, they often focus so hard on the voice that they forget the space. She played 2 clips side by side, me reading to children in 2011 and me saying yes yesterday. She showed me a graph. She pointed to stripes of color that meant something to her. She said what the graph was telling her in plain English, that the yes had been built from pieces of other yeses, stitched together with software that was good but not flawless. She asked if anyone else used this laptop. I told her Lily had been helping me with files. I told her Chase had been updating it a couple of weeks ago because the Wi-Fi was slow. She didn't look surprised. "I'd like to make a copy of everything for Daniel," she said. And I nodded. She told me not to plug anything else in. She told me to sleep if I could. She told me she believed me. That night, Lily came into my room without knocking and asked if I needed anything. She looked at the nightstand and saw the old leather journal Frank had given me for our 30th anniversary. She picked it up and thumbed it with notes I'd scribbled since last week, and she said, "You're writing a lot these days." "That's what I do," I said. "Sometimes," she said, like she was saying something kind, "writing down worries can make them bigger." "Sometimes," I said, "writing them down puts them somewhere that isn't just my head." She put the journal down and said goodnight. When she left, I sat there in the wash of the bedside lamp and thought about truth as a thing that can be recorded and also as a thing that can be edited until it lies. In the morning, my family doctor, Dr. Patel, called me. She has been my doctor for as long as my hands have had spots that look like tea stains. She asked how I was feeling. She asked if I was sleeping. She asked if I'd noticed changes in my memory. I said, "Not beyond 70, and waited to see if she would laugh. She didn't. "Lily came by yesterday," she said. "She was very concerned. She said you'd been anxious and that you'd reported hearing voices on the phone that sounded like you." "Voices that sounded like me," I repeated. "Yes, I did. Because I did. I don't mean to alarm you," she said carefully, "but I think it would be a good idea to come in for a cognitive screening, just as a baseline. It gives us something objective if anyone asks questions down the line." "If anyone asks questions," I said, and realized that was exactly what Lily and Chase wanted. Questions asked about me that could be answered with their version of me. "I'll come," I said. After the exam, which felt like being asked to hold on to pieces of the sky and then recite their color names backwards, I felt like myself. Dr. Patel said, "You did beautifully, Eleanor. No red flags whatsoever. I'll note that in your chart." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it with my whole body. I stepped into the hallway and saw Lily standing there, her coat unbuttoned like she'd run to get news. "How'd it go?" she asked, eyes wide. "Fine," I said. "Dr. Patel says I'm normal." Relief flashed across her face so fast it could have been fear in a different light. "That's great," she said. "We should celebrate." "Let's," I said, and tried to make my voice sound like it used to when a good test grade came home. "Let's make dinner. I'll make the lasagna Frank liked." That evening, while the oven warmed the kitchen and the sauce perfumed the house with garlic and tomatoes, I sat them down at the table. I spread out some papers I had printed from a website that Daniel sent me. Information about identity theft, a checklist. I said, "I think we should review some things. It'll make me feel better." Chase looked nervous for the first time. I thought about how he is when he meets new people. Smooth where other men are clumsy. A kind of politeness that's heavy enough to be a weight. He picked up the checklist and nodded like a man who had studied for a test and hadn't expected an oral exam. "We'll help you with whatever you need," Lily said, "even if we have to make 100 calls." "We might," I said. "Daniel wants me to freeze my credit. He wants to alert the DMV because of the voice thing, because some agencies are using voice. He wants to file a report with the State Consumer Protection Bureau." "Of course," she said. "We can do all of that, but let's pace ourselves, okay? Stress isn't good for your heart." They were trying to set a rhythm for me, slow, sleepy, compliant. I smiled like I was sleeping and told myself that sleeping things wake. The next morning, there was a business card on my kitchen counter that I had not put there. It said, "Wellstead Family Services." The tagline under the name was "Guardianship You Can Trust." On the back, in Lily's handwriting that had once made me little notes with hearts over the eyes, it said, "Just in case." I called Daniel and told him about the card, and he didn't swear because he's too careful to swear where the phone might catch him. But his silence sounded like a word that would blister paint. "Eleanor," he said, "they are positioning for a guardianship petition. Usually there's a paper trail of concerns leading up to it. Calls to the doctor, notes about confusion, maybe a safety check from some home service. If you feel you can, don't confront them yet. Let me get ahead of it. Would you consent to a formal evaluation by a specialist I trust? It will be useful if we end up in court. I consent, I said. I want the truth on paper, not just in my mouth. He set it up. I took the tests. The specialist was older than me, a woman whose eyes had seen more than truth and still watered when she laughed. She told me I passed the battery with room to spare. She wrote words I had wanted to hear since the call. No evidence of cognitive impairment. Rhea called later and said she had found more. She said the folder that had the audio had a companion folder with scripts, lines that sounded like me if you squinted. She said there were file transfer logs that pointed to an external hard drive. She said she could see the footprints of an app that I didn't install and had no reason to use. She asked for permission to share all of that with Daniel. I said yes. She said this would go to the Attorney General if needed. She said we should be careful. Careful, I thought, and stared at the maple tree again because it had been the only thing that hadn't lied. It had been telling me the truth all week, that things fall, that seasons turn, that beauty and endings are the same story told in different parts of the day. That night I heard voices in the mudroom again, lower and closer together. I moved quietly to the wall because I no longer felt ashamed of my curiosity. I felt like a woman who was checking the lock on her door while wolves circled. She went to a specialist, Lily whispered. Daniel's behind this. He's smart. I can be smarter, Chase whispered back. We still have the leverage. Nora likes being taken care of. She'll sign if we push the right places. She won't, Lily said softly. And it struck me that she knew me well enough to see the line I had drawn. Then we move to Plan B, he said. We stage a crisis. You saw how easy it was to get those guys in with a clipboard. We call for a welfare check. We log incidents. We file the petition. Judges love paper. We'll say Daniel's manipulating her because he wants fees. You're going to get us arrested, she said. But there was no fear in it. There was only calculation. Not if we make it look like caring, he said. We'll use the right words. Worried, sudden changes. Confusion. We'll tell stories. She'll look unreasonable for refusing help. And the money, she asked? It's sitting, he said, frozen. But there are other accounts. She has the lake cabin, right? You said Frank had property in New Hampshire. She can't keep track of all this. We just have to be patient. I sat down on the old bench in the hallway because my legs told me they had learned every lesson they could for one day. I put my hand on the wall and felt the heartbeat of my house. Or maybe it was mine. I didn't cry. There are tears that wash things away, and tears that drown you. I chose not to drown. The next day, I invited them to dinner at O'Malley's, the kind of place that has pot roast on Tuesdays and makes dessert in square pans. They like to be seen taking me places. It fits the story they want to tell. Over meatloaf, I told them I was thinking about updating my will. I said things like, you never know, and it's time, and I trust you. I watched their shoulders loosen, and I wanted to throw water on my own face to wash off the lie I was letting them believe. Daniel can do it, Lily said, sounding excited. He charges a lot, I said. I thought maybe we could talk to someone your age, someone who understands, the new ways of doing things. Like a digital will, Chase said quickly. We can help with that. I know a guy. He does online notarizations. Perfect, I said. Tomorrow night, we'll sit at the table and you can explain it to me. I want to understand. Of course, Lily smiled. We'll make it easy. When I got home, I called Daniel and Rhea. I told them tomorrow night at 7, there would be a performance in my dining room and asked if they wanted seats. Daniel said he would bring a colleague who had taken depositions for 20 years and had a voice like a ruler. Rhea said she would bring equipment that could be hidden in a sugar jar and still hear a fly confess to eating the last donut. I laughed because I needed to. It made me feel like a person and not a propositional logic puzzle. The next day was ordinary on purpose. I baked banana bread so the house would smell like trust. I watered the plants, I called the library, and renewed a book I wasn't reading. I waved at my neighbor, Ray, who sharpens knives out of his garage and knows everyone's business because everyone's business walks past his driveway. After lunch, I let myself nap for 20 minutes with the cat at my feet because it was the sort of thing a woman would do if she didn't know what I knew. At 6:30, the visitors arrived. Daniel, in a brown coat that made him look like he'd stepped out of an old courtroom painting, hugged me carefully and set a folder on the hall table. Rhea, with her black case and a scarf the color of a storm before it rains, smiled and asked if she could use the powder room. I walked past the table and touched the sugar jar because it made me feel like I was part of our little conspiracy. At 6:58, tires crunched the gravel in my drive. Lily came in with a bottle of red that had a label with a drawing of a fox, and Chase carried a laptop like it was a platter of appetizers he had prepared with his own hands. They kissed my cheeks. They took their places at the table. I put water in glasses because water is what you give people when you want to hear their voices. Okay, Chase said, opening the laptop. So this is pretty straightforward. We'll go through a secure vendor. It's all above board. We'll enter some details and then you'll read a consent line for the camera so there's a record. The system uses Voice ID to link your video to your file. Voice ID, I said, and let the words sit there a second. I like that they make that part easy. Sometimes I trip over legal phrases. Exactly, he said. They design it so you can't mess up. He clicked. He spoke like he was guiding a child through a craft project. He fed my full name, my birth date, my address into fields like a man spoon-feeding a goose before harvest. He smiled at me when he typed beneficiaries, as if he were offering me a pass to heaven. He opened a draft document with my name at the top in a font that made legal language look like a wedding invitation. Lily's smile had a new edge I hadn't seen before, something glittering. Before we get too far, she said softly, I just want to say how much this means to me. You've always been more than an aunt. You are my safe place. I know, I said, and didn't say the other part, that safe places are not supposed to be places you rob. Chase lifted his phone as if to check a text and glanced at me over it. One quick thing, he said. We're going to get a verification call from the service. It'll be on speaker. It's just standard. They'll ask a couple of questions. Like the pension call, I said. He laughed a little. Less old-fashioned, I promise. The call came. The voice on the other end sounded like it had been smoothed by a machine. It asked the kinds of questions that reassure a person that they are themselves. Confirm your address, confirm your bank, confirm the last four of an account. Then the voice said, please read the consent line on your screen. Chase turned the laptop toward me. The sentence was sentences dragged into one sentence by lawyers. Eleanor Hart, fully authorized. I didn't read it. I can't see without my other glasses, I said, reaching for the empty space on the table where they would be if I had a second pair. Can you read it to me slowly first? Lily read. I watched her mouth form the words. She stumbled once because she had never spoken this sentence before in this room, and the room knew it. Okay, I said. Now you read it as if you were me, so I can hear the cadence. I made my face request something harmless, a kind of theater face. Chase smiled. Sure, he said, and read it in a parody of my tone that would have sounded unkind if I hadn't trained my face to forgive. Again, I said. Slower. He read it again, slower, and I heard every syllable like a nail going into a board. I looked at the sugar jar where a storm hid. Thanks, I said. Now I'll read it. I read it wrong. I replaced fully authorized with will consider. I replaced irrevocably with reluctantly. The voice on the phone said, please repeat, and I repeated the wrong things again. I acted like a flustered woman who had never enjoyed play acting in her life. Chase patiently corrected me. He put his hand softly on my forearm as if he were a dance instructor coaxing a student through the steps of a waltz. We did it 3 times. The third time, I got it right. The voice thanked me and ended the call. We moved on to the beneficiary update section. This is just a placeholder, Chase said casually. You can change it later if you like. He typed his name in a field, then Lily's, and then a trust name I had never heard before. The Maplebridge Family Trust. I said, that's a nice name. And he said, I thought so. Like a man who names a boat after a woman he plans to leave. Lily placed a paper in front of me with highlights I hadn't asked for. This is a springing power of attorney, she said, which means it only goes into effect if a doctor says you need help. Like if I fall and break my hip, I said. Exactly, she said. Or if you start forgetting things. This protects you. And who decides when it springs? I asked. A doctor, she said, with a smile that said, see? Usually two, she added, as if this were a game we were playing and she was reporting the rules. Dr. Patel's note burned like a brand in my pocketbook. I let the pain steady me. Can I ask a few questions? I said. I want to understand what happened last week, this voice thing. Chase leaned back just a little. It was probably just a glitch, he said. Those systems aren't perfect. They match what you say against a template. Could someone make a template? I asked. Could someone feed it things I've said and make it say other things? He laughed a little. On TV, maybe. Not in real life, I asked. Let's focus on the will, he said gently, like I was wandering off the trail. You're right, I said. I'm sorry, I get distracted. It's my age. Lily reached for my hand. I let her take it. I let my palm sit like a lifeless thing under her warmth and told myself that I would wash it later. You don't have to apologize, she said. You've been through a lot. You both have too, I said, and watched their eyes soften. Planning a wedding is stressful. Money is stressful. Finding a house is stressful. Chase's smile did something funny. I saw teeth. We're managing, he said. Of course you are, I said. You're both so capable. I signed a piece of paper that said I had received information I had not received. I initialed a form that said I understood something I did not agree with. I wrote my name on a line under a sentence that said that this was being done of my free will, and it was, but not in the way they thought. At 9 o'clock, they packed up the laptop. Lily hugged me long and hard with a sincerity that tasted like a sugar substitute. You're doing the right thing, she said. You're making sure we can take care of you. Thank you, I said. You're taking such good care of me. I watched her face glow. Narcissists like to be praised with the wrong words. After they left, the house exhaled. Daniel came out from the office, and Rhea came in from the hall where the coat hooks are. My house felt like a stage after a play, the props still warm from hands that had held them. Daniel didn't speak for a moment. When he did, he said, "You were extraordinary." Rhea's hands were already moving, closing her case, labeling a drive that had come out of the sugar jar. They said everything we needed them to say, she said. He repeated the consent in your cadence. He acknowledged voice ID. He linked your will to a trust with his name on it, and the kicker? He described the verification process as matching a template. That word has a very particular meaning in a vendor's documentation I've seen before. Do we have enough? I asked. We have more than enough, Daniel said. And tomorrow morning, we're going to have a judge listen. Tomorrow morning? I was surprised by how quickly the law could move when you invited it like a neighbor and not a stranger. The pension administrator flagged this so hard their system hiccuped, he said. We have a fraud conference call set with them and the bank at 10. After that, we file in county court for an ex-parte protective order as a temporary measure. We'll ask for injunctive relief to freeze any transfer authority and for a no-contact order if we have to. Then we'll serve them with a notice regarding the will. I've seen men like him, Eleanor. They don't wait when they smell money. We can't either. I slept again that night in bolts and stitches. I dreamed I was in the library and all the books were speaking at once in my voice. In the morning, I woke before the sun and baked muffins because there are only so many ways to tell your body you're in charge. The conference call felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with a safety net I couldn't see, but had decided to trust. The bank had a man who sounded like he had been punished for smiling as a child. The pension administrator had a woman who sounded like coffee and sharp pencils. Rhea joined from her car in the driveway because she'd gone to get a charger and didn't want to lose the thread. Daniel spoke first because Daniel knows how to tell a story to people who need facts in order to feel. He told them what had happened. He told them what we had found. He told them what we had recorded. The bank man said, "We take this very seriously." And the administrator woman said, "We are going to be candid. We have a problem with our voice verification system and your case sits at the center of a fix." "Thank you," I said, because even anger has manners in Vermont. "Mrs. Hart," the woman said, and something in her tone felt like someone clearing frost off a windshield. "We're sorry. We will make you whole regardless of outcome, but we would like you to consider participating in a broader investigation." "If it helps someone else," I said, "I will." When the call ended, Daniel said, "Court," and we went. The courthouse in our county is a brick rectangle with a door that sticks when the humidity is wrong. It was wrong that morning. A clerk buzzed us in. Daniel's colleague, the one with the ruler voice, met us there and carried a stack of papers that made my knees weak just looking at them. In the hall, a reporter I recognized from Channel 3 stood talking to a cop like he was trying to read a script without the words. "I didn't call them," Daniel said quietly. "The bank did. They want a public record. They want to warn people without admitting the system that cost a fortune isn't as secure as the brochure promised." In a small courtroom, under a portrait of a judge whose eyes had the weary kindness of someone who's heard lies so long the truth startles him like a bluebird, we told our story. Daniel asked questions the way a man opens a door for a woman carrying groceries. Rhea testified about templates and phase coherence and artifacts, and then she translated every number into a sentence that could make sense at a kitchen table. Dr. Patel came and said I was fine with the dignity of a woman who has said, "You're okay," to hundreds of patients who needed to hear it. The judge asked me questions. I answered them. I told the truth with the small phrasing that truth always uses when it knows it is safe. I heard my own voice. It wasn't me. It sounded like a memory living in someone else's throat. Daniel played a clip from the sugar jar. The courtroom went quiet in a new way. There was just enough of a smirk in Chase's voice on that recording for a man who has spent 40 years deciding where to lay down consequences to decide that he didn't like it. The judge granted the temporary orders. He told Daniel to draft a notice to enjoin any will changes or powers of attorney pending a full hearing. He signed things with a pen that looked older than me. He said, looking not at me but at the room, "We are going to sort this out." When we stepped into the hall, the reporter stepped toward us with a microphone. "Mrs. Hart," he said, "I'm from Channel 3. Would you be willing to talk? This is a public interest story. A lot of seniors..." "People," I said, "not hard, but not soft. A lot of people will be relieved to hear that institutions still have ears for truth." He nodded. "Exactly," he said. And I didn't talk to him because Daniel shook his head almost imperceptibly. And I trust Daniel to know when stories should be told and when they should be held like a warm plate. When we got home, the sheriff's deputy was already in my driveway in a car with lights that looked bored. He had papers in his hand. Lily and Chase were home. They came out of the mudroom when the deputy knocked as if they were in a sitcom, and the laugh track would fill the space between curiosity and dread. He read the order. He handed them copies. Lily's face did something complicated. Chase's face did one simple thing. It hardened. "This is a misunderstanding," he said to the deputy, ignoring me. "She's not well. She's confused. This is elder abuse by her lawyer." "Well," the deputy said, looking down at the paper like it held the answer to a question from a test he had not studied. "The judge says this is what we're doing until the hearing." "When is the hearing?" Lily asked. "Friday," the deputy said. "That's 2 days from now," Chase said, like a man who had counted on the universe moving much slower. After the deputy left, the house held 3 kinds of silence. Mine, which was steady, Lily's, which was brittle, and Chase's, which was armed. "You didn't need to do this," Lily said softly. And for a dangerous second, I wanted to apologize, because she sounded like the other girl she had been before this man and this plan. But then she said, "It makes everything harder for all of us." And the spell broke. Chase leaned across the island. "You're making a mistake," he said, and there was no more honey in it. "You're going to regret this." "I've regretted a lot of things," I said. "I regret believing that love can turn a bad plan into a good person. I regret thinking kindness would do your work for you, but I will not regret drawing a line." He laughed. "You think a judge is going to believe you over us? Over the logs we've kept, the calls we've made, the documentation we've prepared about your deterioration?" I took a step closer because wolves don't like prey that steps toward them. "Do you know the first thing I did this week?" I asked softly. I wrote down what I knew, and then I told people who remember things for a living. They wrote it down, too. "Your documentation is a costume. Theirs is clothing. He rolled his eyes because men who think they are smarter than you do that when you speak from your stomach and not your throat. Leave, I said. The order says you leave. Lily started to cry, quiet, pretty tears that looked good on her face because she has always been photogenic. Chase gathered up their laptops and a set of keys I didn't know they had taken. Before he stepped out the door, he turned back and smiled a smile that had sold 100 things to 100 people. "We'll see you Friday," he said. The hearing felt like stepping onto a stage where the audience had already picked sides and didn't know it yet. The courtroom was fuller. People hear identity theft, and they think about their own ghosts. The Channel 3 reporter sat in the back like a man waiting for his cue. The judge looked more tired, as if the night had put more cases into his docket than usual. Lily and Chase arrived with a lawyer I had never seen before, a man with a perfect part in his hair and a suit that cost more than my car. He stood like a shepherd behind them. He put his hand on the back of their chairs when they sat, a gesture that said to the judge, "These are my lambs." He smiled at me like I was a guest at a party he was hosting, and he had decided to be gracious. He spoke first because he'd filed a motion that morning. Guardianship, of course he had. He said I was sadly deteriorating. He said my confusion had accelerated. He said that recent events had demonstrated an inability to manage financial affairs. He said voices. He said fear. He said concern. He said we love her. He said we are not after money. He said we are after safety. Daniel let him finish because Daniel knows that lies like to tire themselves out. Then Daniel stood, and when Daniel stands, the air arranges itself to listen. He said my doctor had evaluated me this week and last. He submitted results. He said I had been exploited by a sophisticated fraud that the bank and the pension administrator had both acknowledged in writing. He submitted letters. He said my niece and her fiancé had facilitated this by creating and using unauthorized digital materials that imitated my voice for the purpose of circumventing verification. He submitted Rhea. Rhea spoke like math, learning how to be music. She showed slides without showing slides. She walked the court through what template means and what artifact means and what match doesn't mean when you've stitched a voice together like a quilt made of stolen squares. She used a phrase I liked, synthetic timber. Then Daniel pressed play. The sugar jar sang. Chase read my consent line twice, in my cadence, as if the recording could catch his breath and use it as evidence. He used the phrase voice ID and the phrase template and the phrase they make it easy so you can't mess up. He chuckled at one point and it sounded like a shoe scraping a floor. The lawyer with the perfect hair stood up and said the evidence was inadmissible because we had recorded them without consent. Daniel said we had recorded in my own home where I have a reasonable expectation of safety and that one-party consent applied here, and that if the court wanted to debate that, we also had Rhea's forensic copies and bank logs and the pension administrator ready to testify by phone. The judge rubbed his eyes like a man who had been reading small print for too long. He asked Lily to come forward. Lily did, and she looked like the child I had bought school supplies for, the one who used to eat popsicles on my steps while the neighborhood kids ran through sprinklers. She cried on cue. She told the judge she loved me. She told the judge she had concerns. She told the judge I had called her in the middle of the night last month to ask where Frank was. She didn't mention that last month was our wedding anniversary and that I always talked to Frank that night out loud because grief doesn't evaporate the way April dew does when April gets around to it. Daniel asked her when she had last logged into my laptop. She said she didn't remember. He showed logs. She said she never would do anything to hurt me. He played a clip of her voice saying voice ID and template and, "We'll just make this easy." And the courtroom heard kindness as a weapon and flinched. Chase took the stand. He spoke like a man who has practiced telling the truth so he can make lies sound realistic. He said he had never logged into my accounts. Daniel asked him if he knew what Granite Pine Holdings was. He said no. Daniel asked if he had ever transferred files from my desktop to an external hard drive. He said no. Rhea showed logs that traced file transfers to a physical device whose serial number had been submitted to court as part of discovery because Daniel had been awake while other people slept. Chase's lawyer objected and objected and objected, and the judge overruled like a man steadying a boat. The judge denied the guardianship petition. He extended the protective orders. He requested that the clerk coordinate with law enforcement because what had happened here smelled like more than a civil matter. He said, "Mrs. Hart, I am sorry for your loss." And I knew he meant Frank as much as he meant money. When we stepped into the hallway, the reporter asked if I would say something on camera. Daniel raised an eyebrow at me as if to say, "Your call." I looked into the lens because I spent decades reading to children, and I know how to look at a room and make the room feel seen. I said, "A voice is a promise. It says, I am me." When someone steals your voice, they aren't just taking your money. They are trying to take your name. I am here to tell you that you can take it back. The piece aired that night between the weather and sports. The next morning, women at the grocery store leaned over cantaloupes and told me they had cried. Men at O'Malley's said, "Damn shame," and meant the size of the sin and the size of the redemption both. I got 3 letters in the mail from people who had watched their parents or aunts or uncles or neighbors be eaten by a small, polite kind of theft and had thought that the law didn't have hands big enough to lift them out. There was more. Crimes don't end when the gavel taps. They ripple like stones into a pond. The state attorney general opened a case. The county prosecutor called Daniel. There were interviews. There were subpoenas. There was a pre-trial conference in a room that smelled like coffee and printers. There was a plea deal offered because there almost always is when the paper is heavy and the recordings are clear. Lily came to see me once more before the plea. She stood on my porch and asked if she could speak to me alone. I stepped outside because I wanted the fresh air between us. She cried again, but it was a different cry. The first had been for the court. This one was for herself. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said. "It went exactly as far as you and he pushed it," I said. "And then it went further because truth has a momentum of its own." "I thought we were protecting you," she said, which was almost funny in the way that nearly tripping makes you laugh because you didn't fall. "You were protecting a story," I said. "A story where I get small enough that your needs fit in the space where my life used to be." "I loved you," she said. "You did," I said. "And then you loved something else, more." She nodded because even liars sometimes want to be known correctly. "I can't undo this," she said. "You can tell the truth now," I said. She did to the prosecutor whose lined face has seen boys lie to avoid sentences and women lie to avoid shame. She told it not in a clean line but in patches, like a quilt made of fabric salvaged from clothes you shouldn't have worn. She pled to her part. Chase pled to his. He took more time because he built the machine and put the gas in it and drove it toward the house where I slept. I didn't watch the sentencing. I went to the library and reshelved books where they belong because order is a kind of prayer. Afterward, I had coffee with Rhea and Daniel at the small cafe in town where the owner writes messages in foam if you ask. Mine said, "You are heard." I laughed out loud when I saw it because the universe sometimes likes a pun. In December, when the lake froze in a sheet as taut as a drum, I went to Echo Lake with a thermos of cocoa and sat on the bench where Frank and I had sat with our feet barely touching the ground. I poured cocoa onto the snow for him because he liked when I wasted sweetness on purpose. I told him what had happened. I told him the maple still burned red before it went bare. I told him Lily had taken a plea and that she had written me a letter from the county facility that used the word sorry 7 times and made promises I couldn't use but appreciated. I told him Chase would be gone for a while and that I didn't care if he came back changed because I didn't want him back at all. I told Frank that I had found a way to be by myself in a house that used to echo with 2 people's noises. I told him about the Tuesday night supper club I'd fallen into with a few widows and widowers at the church who had eyes that had learned to be both sad and funny at the same time. I told him about the new kids at Story Hour who call me Miss E and think my voice can pull rabbits out of hats. I told him about the phone calls I had gotten from old students who had grown up and moved away and had come back through the TV screen to say, "Miss Hart, I saw you on the news," and "You read me Charlotte's Web when I was 7, and I never forgot the part where Charlotte dies, and I didn't know you had that kind of fight in you, but of course you did." At home that evening, I stood in my kitchen and looked at the sugar jar. I left it on the counter because I like a reminder that sweetness can be put to good use. I wrote a note to put in the jar, a note for myself in case I ever doubt it again. When they use your voice against you, use your voice back. Spring came late because in Vermont it always does, and we forgive it with a thaw. I planted tomatoes in the small raised bed Frank had built the summer his hands were still steady. I painted the front steps the color of a bluebird's chest. I let myself look at the lake cabin listings because Daniel convinced me that the New Hampshire cabin should be titled properly, and that did not mean giving it away. I found the courage to invite friends to stay there, a weekend at a time, the way generosity is comfortable when it's set to music you like. In May, the Channel 3 reporter called me and asked if I would do a follow-up. "We've had a lot of interest," he said. "People want to know what happened next." I told him what I could. I told him about the protections put in place by the bank and the pension administrator. I told him I sleep with my phone in another room because the world doesn't get to talk to me while I'm dreaming. I told him that the voice in my house is mine again. He asked if I wanted to say anything to other people like me who might be scared. I said yes. Get your people in writing. Your doctor, your lawyer, your tech person. When fear tells you you're alone, read the names again. I did not say the other part, which is too complicated for a 6 p.m. segment with a cheery anchor, that love needs boundaries to stand up straight, that family is not a word you can rely on without definitions, that children we hold in our laps can grow into adults who try to sit in our chairs while we're still in them. Summer warmed the porch boards. Kids pulled popsicles apart on my steps again because the neighborhood has a way of refilling itself the way the lake does after a dry spring. Lily's mother, my sister, wrote and asked if she could come for coffee. I said yes. We sat at the kitchen table and cried like women who know each other down to the bone. She told me she didn't know how she'd missed it. I told her abusers teach you how to miss it. We hugged for a long time and agreed to bring a salad to the church picnic that didn't have nuts because Henry, the pastor's boy, breaks out in hives. In August, I got a letter from a woman in Connecticut whose father had almost lost his house, to a man who smiled like Chase. She enclosed a photograph from 1979 of a classroom full of kids with their hands raised. She'd circled me with a red pen and written, "You read me the snowy day. You saved my dad. It's the same voice." On a Wednesday in September, I sat back in my favorite chair, the one with the worn arms where Frank fell asleep after Thanksgiving every year for 40 years, and I listened to the radio because I like to hear people talk while I knit. A piece came on about technology and ethics. They played a clip of some CEO explaining how voice synthesis will unlock convenience. I turned the radio down. I looked at my house and the light on the floor and the dust motes dancing in the beam. I thought about Frank's recordings. I thought about the files on the old laptop and the sound of my laugh caught like a mosquito in amber. I didn't smash the radio. I didn't write a letter to the editor. I picked up the phone because it's still a phone even if it's a small computer, and I called the library. I told them I wanted to host a workshop called Your Voice, Your Name. The director said, "We'd love that," and she meant it because librarians know a plague when they see one, and they know stories are how you inoculate against it. That evening, I wrote the outline. I jotted down Ria's explanations and Daniel's advice and Dr. Patel's calm. I wrote, "Your story belongs to you." I wrote, "There are people who will stand on the step of your heart and ask to be let in because they brought flowers." I wrote, "You are allowed to ask for a badge." I wrote, "I heard my own voice authorize a withdrawal I never made," and then I wrote, "I made one instead. I withdrew my permission from the people who thought they owned it." When the day of the workshop came, 20 people showed up. Some had gray hair, some had hats, some had tattoos that told longer stories than their owners could fit into an hour. I told them what had happened. I told them what I had learned. I watched their faces change, and that way I have watched faces change for years when a book finally opens in a person's mind. At the end, a teenage boy who had been quiet the whole hour raised his hand and asked in a voice still deciding what it will sound like, "How did you know you were right?" "I didn't," I said. "Not in the beginning. I only knew what was wrong, and I walked toward the thing that wasn't wrong, and then I kept walking." When everyone left, the director locked the door and hugged me. "You know," she said, "you could have just moved away. People do. They sell their houses and move to Florida and start over." "I thought about it," I said, "but I wanted to start over here." I walked home. Sunset put gold on the maples again, like it had decided to forgive everything. I made tea. I didn't call anyone because the house had all the voices I needed. The tick of the clock, the kettle, the creak Frank always teased me about, because it makes the pantry door sound like a person clearing their throat before they say something true. I sat down to write one more thing for myself, and for anyone who might someday need to find these words inside a kitchen drawer when a storm is leaning against the windows. When they take your voice, you will want to be quiet because you will think you have nothing left that is yours. But the voice they stole was a copy. The one you keep is the one you use. I went to bed. I dreamed the maple tree had grown through the roof and put leaves on the ceiling like a kindly hand. I woke before dawn. I made banana pancakes because children were coming at 8 for story hour, and I liked to send them home sticky with sugar and full of paragraphs. When they arrived, they burst into my house like they had been waiting all their short lives to be invited. I read them the snowy day because it was hot, and we needed snow in our heads. I read them Charlotte's Web because love and loss are as daily as toast. I read them a sentence I made up on the spot because I wanted to hear it out loud. The voice you use to tell the truth is the one the world cannot take. After they left, the house settled. I put the sugar jar back where it belongs. I called Daniel and told him the workshop went well. I texted Rhea a photograph of the bluebird that had landed on the fence just long enough to make me say, "Oh." I called Dr. Patel and told her I was fine. I called my sister and asked if she wanted to split a pie from O'Malley's because even Justice doesn't cook dinner. In the afternoon, I took a nap because no one can be brave all day. I dreamed of Frank walking ahead of me on the path behind the house, turning back to make sure I was still there. When I woke, the sun had slipped to the west in a leisurely way that made time feel like a friend coming up the front walk. I went outside and sat on the steps and watched the light. A car drove by and Ray waved. I waved back. I listened to my town do the things towns do on ordinary days. A dog barked, a screen door slammed. Somewhere, someone dropped a wrench and swore in a way that was more punctuation than feeling. It sounded like music. It sounded like belonging. It sounded like mine. I do not know if Lily will ever sit at this table again as the girl who ate popsicles or as the woman who tried to make me a story that suited her. I will decide when that day comes what to do with the chair across from me. Today, the chair holds a book and a cardigan and the afternoon light. That is enough. Tonight, I will pour a small glass of the red Lily brought that night, the one with the fox on the label. I will drink it on the porch where the mosquitoes will find me because they always do. I will raise the glass to the maple that watched, to the sugar jar that listened, to the friends whose voices put mine back where it belongs. I will raise it to the girl with the hand in the air in 1979 who wanted to read aloud so badly she felt like she would burst. I will raise it to the man who fell asleep with a book on his chest and trusted me to finish the chapter for him after he was gone. I will say out loud to the world that has my voice on file now in more places than I can imagine, I am Eleanor Hart. I am not a template. I am not a recording. I am not a consent line. And then I will laugh, not the wrong laugh in the wrong files, but the one that starts in my stomach and tries to keep the roof on the house when joy threatens to fly it off. I will go inside. I will turn off the lights. I will go to bed and leave the radio unplugged. I will sleep the kind of sleep you earn when you stop apologizing for taking up space in your own home. In the morning, if the phone rings, I will answer. The voice on the other end might be mine. It might not. It will not matter. I have learned how to listen. I have learned when to hang up. I have learned how to call back the people who keep records of the truth. I have learned how to sing the first line of a song that belongs to me and wait while the rest of the chorus finds its way to my porch. I will speak. I will be heard. And even when the line clicks and goes quiet, even when the world returns to the sound of squirrels racing up the maple and the neighbor kids shouting at a basketball hoop that hangs at an angle like a grin, my voice will keep living in this house, in this town, in this old body that still knows the route to the store and the church and the lake, and in the pages of the books on my shelves that waited for me to know what my own story sounds like when I read it out loud.